2024 is on its way out. It wasn't as big a year for gamers as 2023 was, and it was certainly a much more scarier year for developers as the industry continued to remain unstable and layoffs continued to happen. Still, 2024 managed to produce some noteworthy games, and a lot of stuff happened that will no doubt affect the next year in gaming. In this recap video, let us take a look at some notable games as well as some notable events that shaped the year. In this section, we will take a look at 10 games that came out in 2024 that were newsworthy. This only means that they made the news for one reason or the other, and it doesn't necessarily mean all the games on this list were hits. Sometimes there's a lot to learn from games that flopped than games that became huge blockbusters. In some cases, I will talk about games that I haven't played myself but were so dominant in the news that I feel comfortable talking about them myself. On the other hand, I have skipped a lot of notable games just because I haven't played them myself, and while they were huge hits, they were just standard hits with nothing memorable being reported in the news apart from sales figures. All put together, this is just one weird list that one person made, so don't be surprised if your favorite games are missing. With that said, let us look at my list of notable games of 2024 in alphabetical order. In a year where PlayStation didn't have any blockbuster first-party releases, Astrobot's success came as a pleasant surprise. Sure, it didn't sell 10 million copies like Sony's biggest games do, but it certainly impressed the gaming community at large. It may come off as a childish game, and while it certainly is what we normally call family-friendly, it is full of neat gameplay innovations that would surprise even the most hardcore players. And it is no wonder that the game won Game of the Year at this year's Game Awards. Every year, there is at least one indie game, usually by a solo developer, that becomes a monstrous hit. This year, there were multiple such games, but two notable ones were Balatro and Lords. However, Lords is still in early access, so let's save that one for when it comes out fully. Balatro, developed by solo developer Local Thunk, started off as a small project that the developer wanted to release and then go look for an IT job. However, it soon became an indie darling, went on to sell more than 1 million copies, and became a nominee for Game of the Year at the Game Awards, competing with huge games from developers like Square Enix, Atlas, and From Software. Ever since it was first revealed in 2020, Black Myth Wukong was destined to be a huge success. It further blurred the lines between what is considered an indie game and a AAA game. After the initial hype around the game died down, it became clear that Black Myth might not live up to the lofty standards set by Elden Ring. However, it will continue to be remembered as an underdog story. Being nominated for Game of the Year at the Game Awards alongside the Elden Ring DLC is enough proof of its capability to stand up against the genre leaders. Apart from being the first Call of Duty game to launch day one on Game Pass, Black Ops 6 had the pressure of making people forget the terrible performance of last year's Modern Warfare 3 campaign. Sure, most people eventually stop talking about the campaign after maybe a couple of months and then go play multiplayer and zombies, but those initial 2 months are very important for word of mouth sales. Luckily, Black Ops 6 had 4 years of development time, and Raven Software delivered a superb campaign experience. Meanwhile, Treyarch also ensured that the multiplayer and zombie modes were well polished, and overall, the entire game turned out to be an excellent package. And now it's time to talk about Concord, the game that dethroned Suicide Squad as the most high-profile flop of the year. And I'm not saying that with glee. If anything, I'm a bit sad that we had two high-profile flops this year. Concord was an online-only 5v5 shooter that was made on a budget of more than $200 million. It was pulled from the market in less than a month after failing to attract enough players to keep the game sustainable. Eventually, the developer Firewalk Studio was shut down and the project got scrapped entirely. It kind of lived on in a weird way by being part of Amazon's anthology series Secret Level, but for the most part, it helped the industry by serving as a cautionary tale for developers making games in the crowded online shooter genre. Bungie's 10-year epic story, Destiny, kind of wrapped up in the form of Destiny 2 The Final Shape, and the consensus from the community was the studio stuck the landing. Of course, Bungie immediately began a new journey with no commitment on how long it would last, so Destiny 2 still exists, but from a practical standpoint, the story that started with the launch of Destiny in 2014 came to a definitive end with The Final Shape. Like many others, I too used this as a stepping off point from the franchise that had entertained me for over 7 years. Helldivers 2 was easily the biggest AA hit of the year, surprising everyone involved, even the publisher Sony. After a wildly successful launch, the game sort of stumbled for a while with its live service execution and did not build on its initial momentum. However, it has remained stable throughout the year and was the lone bright spot in Sony's live service catalog, which had multiple misfires this year. An open-world Star Wars game seemed like an easy win for Ubisoft, which has made more than a dozen open-world games in the past few years. There was also interest because this was the first time in recent memory that a company other than EA was allowed to make a Star Wars game. Naturally, expectations were high for this one, but sadly, Outlaws turned out to be yet another 7 out of 10 game for Ubisoft, which has been a very frustrating trend for the company recently. Do I need to mention why this game is on the notable list? Skull and Bones was long thought to be vaporware, a game stuck for so long in development that no one thought it would really come out. But reportedly, since Ubisoft had an obligation to the Singapore government, the game finally made it to launch and was quickly ignored by the larger gaming audience for the simple reason that this was a pirate game that didn't really let you do many things that are considered to be normal for pirates, such as boarding other ships or melee combat. Surprisingly, the game is still continuing its live service operations, with Season 4 launching recently. Last but not the least, there's Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. Released in February, this was the year's first high-profile flop, with Rocksteady's core audience being terribly disappointed with the story of the game and its general live service nature. Making a game where you kill off multiple beloved superheroes seemed like a risky pitch from day one, and unfortunately, the risk did not pay off. Next, let us revisit some notable events that took place this year that were newsworthy. Some of them are notable just because they were surprising announcements, while the others were unfortunate events that will no doubt have a big impact on the stability of the industry for years to come. Once again, I may have missed covering something important, but it's only one person's list, so please do excuse me. The year began on a bad note, with layoffs across the industry continuing to pick up from where 2023 had left off. In fact, 2024 would go on to see significantly more jobs lost compared to the previous year. As of December 16, 2024, the number of jobs lost in the video game industry this year is estimated to be around 14,600, which is more than 2023's estimated total of 10,500. Put together, these 2 years have been terrible for the industry overall. One can only hope that 2025 will begin to stem the job losses, because that is the most important thing to stabilize the industry right now. After admitting defeat in the console hardware race to Sony and Nintendo, Microsoft revealed its next plan. Some games from the Xbox catalog would be released on PlayStation and/or Switch. Initially, only 4 games were released as sort of an experiment, and later in the year, Microsoft confirmed that it was now extending the plan to cover any and every game from the Xbox first-party catalog. This means that we can potentially see the next Halo game releasing on a PlayStation console. For those who keep track of video game history, this is nothing new. Sega and Nintendo were rivals in the console wars of the late 80s and early 90s. Eventually, Sega withdrew from the race and focused on being a third-party publisher. Microsoft seems to be on a similar path, although it probably won't exit the hardware business altogether given the massive cash reserves it has and the obligation to its existing customers to keep the Xbox ecosystem alive for as long as possible. With Microsoft throwing in the towel and Nintendo kind of doing its own thing, Sony felt confident in its position of being the leader of the console market. This confidence led the company extending its footprint in the PC ecosystem, an effort that started a few years back. This year, however, Sony flexed its brand power by enforcing the usage of its PlayStation Network for the PC ports of its games. Initially, the company tried to do this for Helldivers II, but backed off after receiving community backlash. However, every PlayStation game that released on PC since then has made it mandatory to require the usage of a PSN account, even for single-player games like God of War Ragnarok. This basically shuts off access to players in more than 100 countries where PSN is not available officially. But so far, Sony has kept quiet on the issue and has silently continued to enforce this policy. This is kind of a feel-good story and provides a small happy ending to at least one of the many layoff stories this year. Earlier in the year, Microsoft announced that it would be closing multiple game studios, including Arcane Austin and Tango Gameworks. The industry kind of understood the reason for Arcane Austin's closure after the disastrous reception of Redfall, but Tango Gameworks had just delivered a hit for Xbox in the form of Hi-Fi Rush, so it was a surprise to see the studio being shut down. However, in a strange twist, the closure was reversed and Tango Gameworks was brought back to life by an unsuspecting buyer, Krafton. Krafton now owns the rights to the Hi-Fi Rush IP and the studio has already announced a sequel. This is actually two pieces of news about the same studio, Bungie. They have certainly had a mixed year. The good news, as we've seen earlier, was that the final shape got a very good reception from the community. The bad news was that it wasn't enough to help the company retain its independence as per its contract with Sony. This meant that despite the success of the final shape, Bungie had to lay off some of its employees, and for all we know, Sony executives are now indirectly running Bungie. The other news regarding Bungie was the announcement of a mobile game, Destiny Rising. Developed by NetEase on a license from Bungie, this game is expected to introduce the franchise to mobile gaming audiences across Asia. Fans of Destiny 2 have so far had a mixed reception about this news, feeling happy that they sort of have a new Destiny game, but also unhappy that it is a mobile game, which in the eyes of many is a significant downgrade. A bit of game dev news now that the larger gaming community might not care about, but this will certainly affect the development plans of many studios worldwide. Last year, Unity, the company that makes the game engine used by several game studios, announced a controversial revision to its pricing plan. This year, that plan was finally reversed, with the new CEO promising that they would work closer with developers before making any such changes again. This is good news for the game dev ecosystem in general, which would have been destabilized if a large number of game devs had to suddenly start learning new tools in order to move away from Unity. Palworld was a worthy candidate to be in the notable games list, but since that was an early access game, and also because I knew it would be mentioned again in the news list, I didn't bring it up at that point. Palworld, of course, became one of the biggest hits of the year, selling millions of copies on its premise of Pokemon with guns. That tagline was spread by the media and not Pocket Pair, the developer, but in any case, Nintendo and the Pokemon company soon took notice and started planning on how to proceed legally against Pocket Pair. Palworld clearly borrowed many character designs and gameplay elements from the Pokemon franchise. The result ended up being a patent infringement suit, claiming a relatively modest sum of money, but also asking for a total shutdown of the game's sales. Neither party is totally in the clear here, so it will be interesting to see what will be the result of this case next year. Ubisoft delayed Assassin's Creed Shadows to early next year after getting disappointing reception to its recent game releases, including Star Wars Outlaws. While the delay itself was not too surprising, what followed was definitely unexpected. Ubisoft announced that it would change its business model of selling season passes and early access to games in higher priced editions. This is actually a welcome move, and hopefully Assassin's Creed Shadows sells well enough that it encourages other publishers to ditch these monetization models as well. Did you know that there was a new console available in the market this year? It certainly didn't feel like it because the new PlayStation 5 Pro launched to lukewarm response from the community, thanks to its price tag of $700, which translated to even more in other countries. In India, the console hasn't even been launched officially, owing to local restrictions regarding Wi-Fi standards of all things. Sony maintained that the console was targeted only at a small section of its player base who wanted the best performance from their console games. The price tag, put together with the fact that the PS5 Pro doesn't offer a significant upgrade from the PS5, resulted in a muted launch window for the console. And finally, let's talk about the Game Awards. It brought out a few surprise announcements, including the first trailer for The Witcher 4 and a brand new IP from Naughty Dog called Intergalactic. There were a couple of other announcements which got a lot of people excited, but I had no idea what those franchises were. And this was a reminder that no matter how long you have been playing video games, there are always a handful of titles that may be popular worldwide, but you may not know yourself. In this case, the two announcements that got a great reaction from the audience were Okami 2 and Onimusha. On the awards side of things, Astrobot and Balatro took home multiple awards, and there were no big surprises or disappointments. But once again, the trailers took all the spotlight, while the awards were merely a sideshow. The orchestra did a wonderful job once again in performing a medley of the GOTY nominees, and it was a successful event overall. So that was 2024 in a nutshell. It didn't have as many blockbuster releases as 2023, but brought a lot more bad and sad news than last year. Now it is time to look forward to 2025, or what may very well become the year of Grand Theft Auto 6. I'm looking forward to the release of that game like everyone else, but more than anything, I'm looking forward to not reading endless articles hyping up its release. And yes, I'm looking forward to playing a few other interesting games next year as well. Thank you for watching and wish you a happy new year.